Peter, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I wanted to thank Jeff for helping put this together and inviting us here to talk about this. David, not so much. His invitation to work on to be on the panel included the fact that the Niners were going to lose, and I think he even mentioned they were going to lose in the playoffs. And so today I am going to actually give my speech in protest. I will wear my 49ers jersey while I'm sitting next to David just to make him feel even worse.
Have you washed that?
No, all season long this has not been washed. I'm going to sit even closer to him since it hasn't been washed. All right, now we got that out of the way. Look at that. But just look.
Turn around so they can see the back.
13 is an unlucky number.
There you go.
All right.
First time Alex Smith?
No, that jersey's only good for a couple more weeks. All right. What were we talking about? Disaggregation. Okay. So disaggregation is probably the latest buzzword bingo center square in Washington. So pick it whether it's time of austerity, like Duva and I were just talking about in the elevator on the ride up, or the 3 C's, or whatever. You know, it's buzzword bingo time with disaggregation, and it seems to be that if you're going to talk about budgets or threats, the answer is always disaggregation, disaggregation, disaggregation. And sometimes I think we know the answer but forgot the questions. So what I wanted to talk about today is going through those questions. What are the reasons why people looked at disaggregation in the first place, and why is that one of the answers? I think you can narrow it down to 3 problem areas that disaggregation is trying to address, which is current and emerging threats. And the thought there is that disaggregation provides a deterrent capability there by providing defense and protection. The other issue has to do with fragile industrial base and technology obsolescence. And the thought there is that using disaggregation would allow for shorter acquisition time cycles and therefore increased technology refresh and provide more stability to your supplier base. And the third thing that it addresses is declining budgets, that there's cost savings through smaller and less complex satellites. Now these are all hypotheses, so let me unpack some of these issues. Otherwise this would have been a 2-minute speech and really would have been worth bringing my jersey all the way for 2 minutes. So the threat environment. Everybody's aware of what the threat environment looks like. The big game changer, of course, was 2007, kind of a disruptive activity where the Chinese said, okay, no more. We saw how much you use space. You know, it may be an ASAT today, it may be jamming tomorrow, maybe something else. And then you see in the open press a resurgent Russia bringing back a lot of their counter space capability. So the threat environment has always been one where our systems have been threatened, but it seems to be that there's an uptick now in the openness and the willingness to attack U.S. space systems. Disaggregation is supposed to help with this problem by making the adversary's target folder a little bit more complex. I've got more systems up there, so which ones are you going to hit? You can't hit them all. It's kind of like, it's the theory behind taking down GPS, right? You can't take down GPS in orbit, 1, because of where it is, and 2, because there's so many of them. So what you're doing is you're telling the adversary, I'm going to deny you benefit, because you're not going to be able to attack and take down all of my systems. And I'm also going to impose cost on you, because if I have so many disaggregated systems, you're going to have to build such a large space control and counter space capability suite that it's going to cost you a lot of money, and it's also going to expend a lot of political capital to utilize those capabilities. So you're imposing costs and denying benefit on the adversary, supposedly through disaggregation. On the other hand, though, aggregated satellites may have a deterrent capability as well. If you take nuclear command and control satellites and you look at those, and they also carry non-strategic communications on them, one could say that it is less likely that those non-nuclear communications will survive because the nuke command and control systems are acting almost as a bodyguard. Nobody's going to go and attack those systems unless they're really wanting to go to war. That's not to say an adversary couldn't go after WGS, but I'm just saying in some instances there appears to be some deterrent effect by an aggregated satellite, and there appears to be deterrent effect with disaggregated satellites. And this is probably about as good a place as any now that I'm talking about deterrence to bring up international cooperation. Seeing Dick Beneke here reminds me that I should at least do a good favor to the State Department. International cooperation, a disaggregated system appears to lend itself to greater interoperability with foreign partners. This is based on the assumption that a disaggregated satellite system is less complex than an aggregated system. May have lower TRL components in it, may have some high risk components, but overall it's a less complex satellite system, and therefore an international player could plug and play into your overall architecture. That's the theory there. Of course, we don't have any systems that really look like that, and the only one that's a major program heretofore has been the work on ComSats with the Australians, which are a large system. So in theory, you think it may work. The proof is still we're going to have to figure it out as we go through the disaggregation architecture to figure out where really, if you can, plug and play with international partners. So far, talking through the threat environment, you may get the feeling that there's some pros and there's some cons to disaggregation. I don't think that there is a definite benefit by going fully disaggregated to helping the threat environment. I don't think that there is by having a completely aggregated system like we currently have now. Well, it's not completely aggregated, is defeating the threat either. So I think there's a mix, and I'm going to go through the rest of this and tell you and continue to talk about this mix of capability that I think is the right answer. The next issue that you try to address at disaggregation is the technology base and obsolescence. When you turn the crank every 10 to 15 years to build a major system, we all know what that does to the industrial base. A lot of folks here are from industry. I don't need to go and describe this to you, and the folks that are in government have dealt with this issue time and time again, so I'm not going to belabor the point. And of course, the belief is that if you do a disaggregated system, you're pumping something out, usually on a commercial-like timeline of 24 to 36-month centers, putting the system up for a lifetime, supposedly around 4 to 5 years, right? So the thought is there is I'm putting more capability in, doing a higher technology refresh rate, and because the systems are going up with a higher frequency, I'm able to take more risks and put things up there that I would not normally put up there. Like you had with the chirp sensor, you have a hosted IR payload that you put up, you're able to test out a steering capability that you weren't probably going to put up before, but you had an opportunity to do it. So you're able to take greater opportunities to leverage new technologies. I think because of the preponderance of industry folks that are here, I'm not going to really go through the technology-based issues as much. I think you all live it every day and understand it. So the last thing I wanted to address is probably the one that everybody thinks is the biggest reason for disaggregation. That's the declining budgets and affordability. So the best news about a declining budget, and if the sword of Damocles ever drops and sequestration happens, is that it may break the system enough that you have to go at disaggregation or look at alternate architectures. That may be a positive thing, breaking the system. Now, on the other hand, to look at a large, big satellite and say that's part of the problem, I think, is also not accurate. If you look at cost per pound to launch something, or cost per pound for a satellite, the bigger the satellite is, the actual cost per pound of that satellite decreases. The bigger the satellite is, the more function you get out of it for what you're paying. But also, we don't, the warfighter and the intelligence community don't place a value on their satellites by how much they weigh. They place a value on them and how much capability they provide. So maybe cost per pound shouldn't be our key determinant, but you have to look at something. There has to be some way to value whether a disaggregated system or an aggregated system is providing more value, more bang for the buck. And the way I would probably look at it is the lifetime program cost. What is it costing from the point that I have thought about the system, worked through the requirements process to a satellite being on orbit? You look at things like lost opportunity costs. If I'm putting something up that's going to be up there for 15 years, by the time its last 5 years up there, it's in essence you've launched something that has the processing power of an Atari versus something that has a new, faster processor, greater capability. So there are opportunity costs lost there. And if you're constantly refreshing, your NRE is somewhat amortized over the lifetime of building all these different systems versus doing $1 billion chunk here and $1 billion chunk there to continue working the program. That would be an aggregated large program. Now there are some beliefs that if I build more, it's going to cost more. Right? If I need 1 pound of capability, so to say, whether I break that up into 4-ounce chunks and buy 4 4-ounce satellites, or I just buy the 1 pound satellite, I'm still going to have to pay the same amount to get the same capability. Right? I'm still buying 4 satellites and paying for 2 launches or 1 launch or whatever. So I'm still spending the same amount of money. I'm not quite sure that that would be accurate. But again, what I want to focus on is the total lifetime cost. If I am turning that crank now every 3 years, every 2 years to put something out, you can run into a system where Henry Ford dropped the cost of automobiles because he was cranking things out, and the acquisition cycle was such that he could work better with suppliers and drive the cost down. There's repetitive manufacturing in there versus something being built every 10 to 15 years, or the prime contractor having to take over the work that a third tier supplier used to do, but they went bankrupt in the interim 10 years of a system being acquired. So I think you can actually build satellite systems that will equal the large aggregated system and do it at a reduced cost with a higher refresh rate because you're doing things on volume. The other important thing here is not just looking at the disaggregated architecture, but it's how the rest of the community works on acquiring the systems, building the requirements for those systems, and operating those systems. You can't just put a disaggregated architecture up there and go, okay, this is going to work. I've taken my IR capability and I've broken it up, and now it's going to work because I got sensors everywhere and everybody's talking. You need to have the requirements guys, the acquisition guys, and the ops guys all on the same page. And what we found through war games is, the disaggregated architecture looks great at the beginning, and you and I sat through this before. If the ops guys don't know how to use those systems, they're essentially worthless. So you've got to have the techniques and procedures to work those systems, and you also need to have a disciplined requirements community to say this is the capability that I actually need. I've often held that the acquisition community really isn't the problem with some of the costs in our programs. What it really is the requirements community, because the acquisition system is essentially a computer. If I put garbage into that system, what I'm going to get out the other end is garbage. All right. So I've often faulted the requirements community, and before I worked for Marc in space policy, I was a requirements guy, so I'm not just throwing stones at the requirements guys. I was there and lived it. And you can't really fault the requirements guys for what they put in the requirements process, because what essentially the requirements guys are doing is they're coming in and saying, okay, you need to build a satellite. It's going to be up there for 10 or 15 years. It's going to take you 5 to 7 years to build. So I need to build a system and put the requirements in for a threat that is 15 years away from now. If you were going to eat once every 15 days, you'd probably go into the restaurant and order everything on the menu twice because you knew you weren't going to eat for another 15 years or 15 days. And it's the same thing the requirements guys do. I can't fault them for going in and asking for the sky because they don't know what they're going to need. You ask anybody, even in Andy Marshall's shop, what the world's going to look like in 15 years, and they'll just smile and laugh at you. But what we're asking our space requirements guys to do the same thing every day. And so I think, again, another benefit of disaggregated architecture may not be in the cost savings or the threat environment, but actually putting some rigor into what our systems actually are supposed to do. Getting the requirements guys to live in a more realistic world. We're forcing them into a very, very difficult situation. So all these things work into what you've got now, and this has been covered before in an excellent piece, which if you guys haven't read, I highly suggest, that Ellen Polakowski and Doug Lavero and Tom Chrysler put out in Strategic Studies, I think spring of 2012. So it's about a year old now, but I highly recommend reading that. They did a really good job going through and doing analysis on this. And they talk about the vicious cycle of space acquisition right now. And Tom Taverney, Major General Tom Taverney, was integral in doing this. And what I wanted to do is just very quickly just read through kind of what the vicious cycle looks like and where disaggregation could help with that. What they say and what Taverney says is that the cycle looks something like this. You start with the requirements process, JSIDs and the JROC, right? And we just talked about what the problems there. They come through and say, okay, here's the aggregated requirements. I got this whole list of things I gotta do. Then you come up with these complex and unexecutable baselines. Then those requirements and the funding for those systems begin to change. They're unstable because it's such a large program. People are stealing money from it, putting money back in. It's an unstable funding program. It's large, complex, expensive. There's no spare systems. We start working gap management, as Commander Stratcom's talked about. You have to have a lot of analysis and a lot of revisions on the program before it's built. Spend a lot of money figuring out the system is going to work on orbit. Millions, hundreds of millions of dollars making sure it's going to work before it even launches because you're only going to get one. You only get one bite at this apple. Longer schedules, lower risk tolerance, low risk launch with a lot of reviews, expensive launch, and then it lowers the launch rates. Lower launch rates drive up costs, and the result is expensive, late, and outdated systems. And then at the end of the cycle, you end up back where you were, which is at the top of the JROC and the JSITS process, and you go back in the requirements guys and go, I just built this. We went through a ton of pain putting this together. Instead of going through another round of pain, let's just build the same thing over again. Everybody goes, hey, all right, that sounds good to me. And so you get this whole system going over and over again in this vicious cycle. So, to kind of add it all up, because I've taken way too long here, the work that Polakowski, Lavero, and Chrysler did, the work that Taverny did, really goes through, and I really highly recommend reading their work, about how you break this vicious cycle. And disaggregation is one element, one way to break this cycle. You have to go through and work with the acquisition community, the requirements community, the ops community to make sure that this disaggregation system works. But in essence, the distributed architecture helps solve a lot of those problems. It solves a lot of the root causes of this vicious cycle that we're in right now. Now, I'm not a one-size-fits-all believer. I don't think we should move to a completely disaggregated system. Right? Aggregated systems don't solve all of our problems, and I don't think disaggregated systems will solve all of our problems either. Large programs have their place. Sometimes it takes a lot of energy or a large bus in order to do the job. And if you've got a lot of real estate on there, I don't think you'd leave places vacant, leave spots vacant if you're going to go through that much trouble to launch a system. I think the answer is more towards the position that we took during the writing of the space policy, and also something that Major General Taverny put into his paper, about diversification. Diversifying your portfolio. You do it for your own money. The government should do the same thing with its own space portfolio. You build some large systems that are your low-risk bond type of investments, and then you've got your high-risk technology stocks, things that are high risk, potentially high payoff, also could lose you some money, but there's some value in diversifying the portfolio there. I think Taverny said it pretty well. This is a quote from Taverny here. Mixed constellations combine extremely capable and exquisite flagship class systems we are currently building with less capable, shorter life, targeted capability Class B, C, and D. These are, Class B, C, and D aren't your flagship missions that can accomplish a significant portion, if not all, the requirements. This, in turn, allows simplifying the flagship missions and reducing the cost provided the exquisite capabilities. So, in summary, what I want to tell you is I'm not quite sure disaggregation solves the threat problem, right? I think disaggregation could help you solve the budgetary problem, and it definitely helps you solve the technology obsolescence and infrastructure problems. But disaggregation should not be seen as a threat to the current large systems. It should be seen as a symbiotic capability where the disaggregated systems can test out capabilities that can be put onto the larger systems or be part of a larger architected network to provide additional capability to the larger systems. I don't think this is a one or the other type situation. So I think that we're off to a good start with the studies that are being done in ISR, in meteorological and nuclear command and control. I think there's plenty of other places to look. I think anything that's ISR related, anything that requires lots of eyes in the sky is another good place to look at disaggregation as well. So after all that, go 49ers.
So is that the amount of points that the 49ers are going to score?
Yeah. The Ravens will score 2 because the Niners will feel bad for them and kneel down in the end zone.
All right, thanks, Peter.